Welcome to another edition of Palm Beach County NatureScope. I'm Steve Bass, your host. 12,000 years ago, when human beings first came to this peninsula, there were two kinds of tortoises living here. One was a big guy, like these Aldabra tortoises at the Palm Beach Zoo. The other was the burrowing gopher tortoise that we know today that lives in high pineland habitats. Now, shortly after humans arrived, the larger Florida tortoise disappeared. We don't know for a fact that they ate them all, but the disappearance so soon after humans arrived is fairly suspicious. Today, the smaller of Florida's tortoises is facing pressures and dangers that it's never faced in all those 12 millennia. Habitat loss and fragmentation, even poaching, has reduced its numbers greatly from what it was just a few decades ago. On today's show, we're going to be discussing their natural history, their habitat, and we're even going to take you to a place where few humans have ever been, down into a tortoise burrow. So stay with us on Palm Beach County NatureScope. Welcome to a very special edition of Palm Beach County NatureScope, a gopher tortoise edition of Palm Beach County NatureScope. Now, when we were thinking about locations for this show, we naturally thought of High Ridge Scrub, and that's where the NatureScope cameras have come today. This is an excellent habitat for gopher tortoises, and what makes it that way are a couple of things. First of all, it's got some of the highest elevations in the South County. Deep, sandy soils are places that are perfect for gopher tortoises to make their burrows. Also, there's very little tree cover in this site, and that increased sunlight makes the plants grow that the gopher tortoises love to eat. Cactus, various kinds of grasses, and other herbaceous plants, because they're vegetarians, these little burrowing turtles of ours. We're going to have a special guest from the Florida Wildlife Conservation Commission to help us understand what the inside of a burrow is really like a little bit later. But first, I've got some things I'd like to share with you, some objects I'd like to show you that may help to understand what kind of an animal a gopher tortoise is and really how they live and how they're built. Let's take a look. The name gopher confuses a lot of Floridians. We know that there's a mammal called a gopher, a burrowing mammal, and oftentimes we think, well, maybe that has something to do with the name gopher tortoise. But really, all parts of the range of the gopher tortoise were within the old Confederacy. And in fact, during the slave days, gopher tortoises were considered slave food. It was one of the very few kinds of wildlife that could be captured without the use of weapons. So the name kofa, the word kofa, which means turtle in several West African languages, probably became corrupted to gopher in English, and that's the way the gopher tortoise got its name. Now, all tortoises are also turtles. Tortoises are just a kind of turtle, and they are almost all terrestrial, although not all of them burrow. In fact, in the intro to the show, the Aldabra tortoises that we showed at the zoo do not burrow, and the prehistoric tortoises that lived in Florida did not burrow either. Such large tortoises really depend on their bulk, on their volume, to keep them healthy in cold weather or real hot weather. I'm holding the shell of one of our gopher tortoises, our small burrowing Floridian tortoises, and it's easy to see that this is not the shape of a regular aquatic turtle. It's not streamlined really in any way. Instead, it's high, the shell is high and domed, and it's built for strength rather than slipping easily through the water. And like all turtles, of course, the tortoise's shell is a combination of expanded and fused vertebrae, or backbone, here along the very middle of the top shell and expanded and fused ribs along the side of the shell attached to the vertebrae. And then the bottom shell is the expanded sternum, exactly analogous to our own sternum on the bottom shell. And this completely surrounds the animal with hard, bony structure that's quite solid and hard. Once the gopher tortoise gets grown, there are few kinds of wildlife that really pose a threat, a physical threat, to the tortoise. Now, when baby tortoises are hatched out, their shells are quite flexible and soft and are growing rapidly, and naturally they are much more at danger of being consumed by larger predators. I have a live gopher here, and we can see that the covering is much darker in color than that white bone, and actually the gopher has these scutes that are square to pentagonal or hexagonal in shape. And in fact, when you look very carefully at the scutes, you can actually see lines of growth. Now, these aren't like annual, like the rings in a tree, but the little rings in the scutes are indicative of periods of growth in the animal's life. These scutes are made out of the same thing that our fingernails are made out of, keratin. It's a protein material that is protective of the shell, but now there's a layer in between. In fact, microscopically, the shell of a tortoise is like a sandwich with rye on the outside, white on the inside, and salami or bologna or something in between, because there's a living layer in between the keratin and the bone. This animal's shell is alive. This tortoise can feel the warmth of my hands. It can feel a movement of my fingernails over its keratin shell. But it's a mistake to think that the shell is its home. The burrow is very much the animal's home. The animal is built for burrowing. Notice the strong, shovel-like front limbs. They're very powerful. And at the end, they're well armed with these big, heavy scales and the big toenails, claws of the animal to rip through any roots that are in the way when it needs to burrow. Its head is also well armored with scales, and right in front, under the animal's chin, is this strong sort of battering ram on the front of its shell, which also helps the gopher to burrow and push sand like a little bulldozer. The gopher tortoise cannot go completely into its shell, but it can use the front feet to put in front of the nose to protect the head, and also put the back feet up under the shell. So this is a very tough little animal that we're talking about, and very powerful and a strong burrower. When we come to a gopher habitat that's as perfect as high-ridge scrub, we see signs. Sometimes we see tracks, and we also see scat. And I have an example of scat here on these special forceps that we can take a look at. Now, just from looking at this scat, we can tell that these animals are herbivorous. It's almost totally made up of grass stems and the stems of other plants. And it's also pointed on one end, and whenever you find scat, the pointed end is the direction that the gopher was traveling at the time the scat was left behind. These little animals are almost totally vegetarian. Sometimes if they were to find a dead animal, they might do a little chewing on some of the flesh, or an old dried up carcass or something of that kind. But they're almost totally vegetarian. And to tortoises, this area surrounding us right now is like a salad bar. And each tortoise will use, as a rule of thumb, perhaps half an acre to wander over and get their food from. Gophers are one of a very, very few species of animals that actually make homes in the same way humans make homes. It's a very short list. On that, you'd have to include alligators, perhaps, in Florida, and beavers up in the rest of the country. Beavers and gophers actually have homes that they live in year-round. Very few animals make this kind of a structure. If you think of a bird nest, for example, a bird nest isn't a home in the same way we think of a home. It's merely a container to hold first the eggs and then the nestlings while the adults are feeding them. But with a gopher, it's a structure that the animal builds itself and in which it lives both winter and summer. So year-round, a gopher really needs a burrow to live in. If you put a probe down inside a burrow, you'll find that a very short distance inside, barely more than a meter. On the hottest days, temperatures there will be 10 degrees cooler than on the surface, and on the very coldest days, temperatures will be perhaps 10 degrees warmer, just that very short distance down into the burrow. So it's very much like home. The kinds of environments that gopher tortoises like to live in really need to burn. There need to be periodic fires in the areas where gophers live, and there's no better shelter from a fire than a gopher burrow. At the very first hint of smoke, gopher tortoises go down into their burrows, and then they're safe from whatever fire might be taking place on the outside. There's another turtle which lives in gopher tortoise habitats, which is called the box turtle. And it gets that name because, unlike the tortoise, the box turtle can close its shell up. There's a hinge on the bottom of the box turtle shell, and the box turtle can pull its legs and head inside and completely close up its shell. Gophers, of course, as we just saw, can't do that. Gopher tortoises and box turtles are sometimes confused. Really, they shouldn't be. As you saw with the live specimen, the color of the gopher tortoise on its shell was uniform, but with box turtles, there are always colored light and dark markings on the outside of the shell. Plus, gopher tortoises get a lot larger than box turtles do. Box turtles are rarely over 8 inches. Both, however, live to be very old. Both box turtles and gopher tortoises can live well over 100 years.